Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Canadians with Disabilities and Their Allies. I'm your host, Brent, the weatherman. Settle in and get ready for a conversation with our special guest. Well, welcome Shane. I want to welcome you to a Twitter space, Canadians with Disabilities and Their Allies, and just everyone that's listening in today. Thank you, Shane, for coming by.
Absolutely, it's good to have an opportunity to talk about what's some pretty important issues.
Yes, the GLBI and the Canada Disability Benefit for Canadians with Disabilities across Canada. And you have your intake on what's happening with all that stuff.
Well, I think it's pretty exciting and it's pretty important. There's a lot of unanswered questions, though. We'll see. I guess the things that are most important to people who are living with disabilities who might benefit from this. There really is a question about how much will it be. You know, there was talk about. I've heard talk everywhere from $500 to $1,700 a month, and I don't know where they're going to land on that. That will be a matter that probably will be as much up to the finance minister as it is to Minister Qualtrough, who has responsibility for the file. So how much is going to be an issue? There's a big issue about eligibility and who's going to qualify for this. If they use something like the disability tax credit as a qualification, that would be a real problem because the majority of people in the country who should have a disability tax credit don't. I know in British Columbia we were very active in trying to sign people up for the DTC, and we still figure that we had maybe 50% of the people who actually would qualify we had signed up, and we were doing better than other provinces. So you want to make sure that that gets dealt with. And you know, there have also been suggestions that, maybe you use the provincial disability criteria for whoever qualifies provincially. The problem with that for the federal government, of course, is it's different from in every province. And I'm not sure that they can have a federal benefit that doesn't apply equally to people across the country, but applies differently depending on the province. So that'll be a problem potentially as well, and also, of course, not wanting to make sure that provinces don't claw any of this back and take the money back out of provincial benefits. And then the timeline, how long is it going to take to negotiate all of this with the provinces and that? I think it's going to take a little bit of time, but the principle behind a significant disability benefit is huge. And something that absolutely people should stay on top of and make sure it goes forward.
You know, many people on social media I've noticed they're kind of balking back of saying that, you know, there's going to be a 3-year study, and they're saying, well, we don't need a 3-year study, we know what we need now.
I would agree that I don't think there needs to be a 3-year study. I think, though, that there is going to be some period of time, because the hardest part in some ways, first of all, they have to obviously work it out in the federal cabinet and as to how much money they're going to put up and how they're going to decide to distribute that money. But there is a significant negotiation to be had with all the provinces. And my experience certainly is that once you start negotiating with the provinces, it becomes complicated because you have 10 provinces and 2 or 3 territories and probably more opinions than even that. So that's not going to be easy to do, and it's going to take some work. So I do think this is going to take some time, and that's the reality of it. And I know that'll be frustrating for people who would like to see this benefit come sooner.
Yes, absolutely. Neil, you have any take on that?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots to say, of course. One of the things that has always kind of bothered me is you look at the provincial assistance, and the rates are so different across provinces, right? It shouldn't really matter that if I go to Alberta or if I go to Newfoundland or whatever, all of a sudden my rates are wildly different, and the shelter rate is different. And we're all disabled. We're all Canadian. It should be equally distributed, and I think that's where the provinces have always fallen short, and in some ways that's why I kind of wish it was a federal responsibility rather than offloaded to the provinces. But I don't know what you have to say about that, Shane.
Well, and it's a provincial responsibility, and that's not going to change. There will be some different influences if there's significant and billions of dollars of disability benefit are put on the table by the feds in some form. That will change it a little bit, but it's always going to be provincial jurisdiction. And you're right about this issue about kind of how the differences from province to province. And, I know I heard, of course, lots about BC and Alberta and the disability rate, assistance rate, PWD versus the ACE rate in Alberta. And the ACE rate in Alberta is about $300 for a single person. It's about $300 more than what BC provided. And I remember looking at that when I was minister and thinking about how did that happen. And I asked my ministry to look at the criteria for eligibility for ACE in Alberta, and then to look at our people on PWD and say how would they be affected by that criteria. 40% of the people who were in British Columbia collecting PWD would not qualify in Alberta. The reality is transfer payments, not a lot of it goes to this. Most of this is all, and it's hard to know where the money comes from because the money comes without a lot of strings on it. And right now, we're not going to see anything happen around these kind of payments necessarily because, as you will know, and it's been kind of a big story in the media, the Premier's group, and it's led by John Horgan, who every year a different Premier becomes the chair of the Premier's committee, and it's John Horgan's year this year. But they're pushing very hard to increase the dollars that go into healthcare in a significant way because they've been cut just about in half by federal governments over years in terms of a percentage of the cost of healthcare. So there's a big push to try to get those numbers up. And that would be huge because if that happened, it would certainly ease the pressure on other money to be able to go into other places, including support for persons with disabilities.
Yeah, because BC only gets 22% of the transfer payments from Ottawa, which is not very much. I know John had said at one time it used to be 50-50. Now it's only 22, which is a huge burden for the province to deal with. I mean, especially with we got the ongoing opioid crisis and I mean homelessness, and I mean the list goes on, and income inequalities. And yeah, I totally get what you're saying, Shane, on that, because like money has to come from somewhere, right, to balance it out. And if we can get more from the federal government for the transfer payments for health, I mean that's going to alleviate a lot more room to work with. And I mean, one of my concerns too is what I've been hearing from so many people is they're worried about if they went with this federal program, right? It'd be like a top up, but people are really worried about their medical. They're saying, well, what would happen is that if they went with that, like, would we lose our medical and all the other benefits that come along? And I said, well, as far as I know, no. If it's a top up, the provincial program stays in place, so you'll never lose that.
See, and I think that I would like to think that in British Columbia, with the current government, it's a progressive enough government that there would be no clawbacks or no reductions of benefits, but that's not guaranteed long term. And you're quite right to be concerned about those things. And I spoke earlier about the need for the federal government to negotiate with the provinces. And those are exactly the kinds of things that the federal government needs to negotiate, is commitments and guarantees that everything that people receive today in any given province, that none of it will be taken away because of the disability benefit. And that's going to be a bit of a tough one. Just back on the healthcare, we have to all remember 40%. So our provincial budget now is in excess of $50 billion a year. I think it's $54 billion a year, the provincial budget. 40% of that goes to healthcare. So it's huge. And you were quite right, Brent, that, you know, it used to be closer to 50%. That was the deal. It's now under 25%. And I know the provinces want to push it back up to about 35%. And if they could get close to that, that would be billions of dollars of additional money coming into the province for healthcare. And that would be very, very beneficial in a whole lot of ways.
One thing I wanted to get back to, Shane, was talking about employment, people with disabilities getting employment. Is I've always thought that the government didn't understand or didn't respect how hard it is for people with disabilities to get employment, because, as you know, like I've worked myself for over 20 years, and then it's like, you know, you work for 20 years and then the government says, well, thank you for working for 20 years. Now we'll claw back your survivor's pension. So that's kind of disrespectful. But that's on the one side of the coin, right? And the other side of the coin that I've talked to a lot of people about is this whole idea that there's almost too much value that we, as a society, that we attach to our working lives. Like, whenever you meet anybody, it's like, you know, what do you do? It's not like, who are you as a person? It's like, what do you do for a living, right? It's like, so much of it is tied to our careers and what we do. And I think that's really unfortunate, because I know, you know, that there are a lot of people with disabilities that just cannot work at all. And, you know, it's not a fault of their own. They just cannot work. And I think that's really unfortunate that so much is just, we just hear so much to, like, what do you do for a living? What work do you do? And to put a value that somebody that doesn't work doesn't have value or is not important. I think that gets lost on a lot of governments, that people with disabilities, even if they don't work, still have value and still can have ripple effects on people, regardless of whether they have a 9-to-5 job or whatever.
Those are good comments, and they're insightful comments. So, you know, I find it interesting when I did the consultation for the poverty reduction strategy Together BC, and then when we did it for the Accessibility Act as well, and we went around and talked to a lot of people who are living with disability, and almost without exception, the first issue that people would tell me is, I don't have enough money to live on and I need more money. That always. But almost without exception, the second issue that was at the top of the list for them was a job. And they wanted a job. And it may be not the typical 40-hour-a-week, 5-day, 40-hour-a-week, but they wanted a job where they could participate and engage. And it may not be, it may be part-time, it may be limited, it may need to be accommodating, so that it accommodated the nature of their disability. That was right at the top of the list for people. And people had that desire exactly for the reason that you say. Because you and I both know that, you know, when you meet somebody, the first thing after what's your name is, what do you do? That's almost the next question. And people have value. And I talk to so many people, and people with disabilities who quite rightly said, hey, I have value, I have skills, I want to contribute, and I want an opportunity to do that. So employment really became a big issue for me. And I agree, employment is not necessarily one answer for everybody with a disability. It has to be tailored. But people want to work, and they want to work because they want more income and they want a better life. But they want to work too because exactly the reason you said, we as a society value work at a very high level, and people want to be part of that.